Arthur Finch, a man whose life felt less like a grand opera and more like a never-ending off-Broadway farce, received the news of his Uncle Silas's demise with a distinctly unoperatic yawn. Not that he disliked Silas, far from it. Silas was a rogue, a scoundrel, a man who believed the best way to live was just slightly outside the law, preferably with a good whiskey in hand and a dubious poker game underway. But Silas had always been present. Like a particularly pungent durian, you could always sense his existence, even if you weren't actively engaging with him. So, the news, delivered by a stiff-collared solicitor named Mr. Blackwood, whose name, Arthur noted, was almost comically appropriate for a funeral announcement, felt less like a tragic loss and more like a significant logistical inconvenience. "Mr. Finch," Blackwood droned, his voice as dry as a desert wind, "I regret to inform you that your Uncle Silas passed away peacefully in his sleep last night." "Peaceful?" Arthur snorted internally. Silas probably died mid-dream, chasing a phantom full house or outrunning a debt collector. He left explicit instructions for me to contact you first. Of course, he did. Silas, ever the showman, would never let a good exit go unheralded, even if it was just a silent slumber. Arthur, a struggling jazz musician whose primary gig involved playing elevator music at a high-end department store, and whose personal finances resembled a Jackson Pollock painting. Chaotic, colorful, and utterly without discernible pattern. Merely grunted. He'd always been the black sheep, the one Silas inexplicably favored, probably because they both shared a healthy disdain for anything resembling a regular schedule or gainful employment that didn't involve questionable ethics. "Your uncle left specific instructions regarding his arrangements," Blackwood continued, a slight hesitation betraying what Arthur suspected was a deep, professional discomfort with Silas's particular brand of chaos. "And a letter. One that must be opened before the service." "A letter." Ah, the plot thickens. Silas, a man who communicated primarily through coded messages on cocktail napkins and muttered pronouncements, had penned a letter. This was going to be good. Or, more likely, catastrophically bad. "Would you be able to come to my office today?" Blackwood asked, a faint tremor in his voice, as if he expected Arthur to refuse and demand a séance instead. Arthur glanced around his cramped, bohemian apartment, a tribute to questionable interior design and the lingering scent of stale coffee. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of sunlight, highlighting the stacks of unpaid bills masquerading as modern art installations. "Given my current financial solvency, Mr. Blackwood, I believe I can make time for anything involving the estate of a recently deceased relative," Arthur replied, leaning back in his creaking desk chair, which probably held more structural integrity than his bank account. "Just give me an hour. I need to locate a pair of socks that don't have holes in them. It's a matter of professional courtesy, you understand." He could almost hear Blackwood's internal eye roll, a symphony of exasperation only a man who deals with the quirky last wishes of the wealthy could truly appreciate. Blackwood's office was precisely what one would expect from a man whose clients likely owned private islands, and whose surnames appeared in bold print on historical plaques. Dark, polished wood gleamed under discreet lighting, leather-bound tomes stood sentinel on impossibly tall shelves, and the city skyline, a majestic sprawl of concrete and ambition, offered a silent, intimidating backdrop. Arthur, feeling somewhat like a rogue jazz note in a classical symphony, resisted the urge to hum a particularly jaunty, slightly off-key tune. Blackwood, all sharp angles and tailored tweed, rose as Arthur entered, a sympathetic grimace plastered across his face. "Mr. Finch, thank you for coming so promptly." "Promptness, Mr. Blackwood, is a virtue I rarely employ unless it involves an open bar or a truly compelling musical improvisation," Arthur quipped, settling into a ridiculously plush leather armchair that probably cost more than his entire instrument collection. He stifled a sigh. This was it. The moment of truth. Would Silas have left him a secret stash of gold doubloons? Or, more likely, a collection of antique taxidermy and a lifetime supply of bad jokes? So, Mr. Blackwood, why the VIP treatment? Let me first. Blackwood, a man clearly unaccustomed to such levity in the face of death, opened a desk drawer and pulled out two envelopes. One, thick and official-looking, bore the firm's imposing letterhead. The other, a smaller, cream-colored affair, had Arthur's name scrawled on it in Silas's unmistakably flamboyant hand, a script that looked like a drunken spider had tap-danced across the page. Your uncle was an individual of unique character, Mr. Finch, Blackwood said, a subtle tension in his voice. Brilliant in his enterprises, but also exceptionally particular about his final wishes. He left very specific instructions regarding his will and his funeral arrangements. Arthur nodded. Sounds like Silas. Always had a flair for the dramatic, even when ordering a sandwich. Blackwood slid the cream envelope across the polished surface. He wished for you to read this privately before we discuss the rest. Arthur picked up the envelope. It still carried the faint, smoky scent of Silas's favorite pipe tobacco, mingled with something vaguely like cheap cologne and questionable intentions. His hands, usually steady as he plucked a bass line, trembled slightly. He carefully broke the wax seal, a simple S embossed over a rampant lion, an emblem Silas had probably designed himself after a particularly strong brandy. Inside, a single sheet of paper, Silas's messy scrawl filling every available space. My dearest Arthur, it began, making Arthur wince slightly. Silas rarely used such terms, unless he was about to con you out of your last dollar. If you're reading this, it means I've finally kicked the bucket. Don't mourn too hard, boy. I lived more lives than a cat with a gambling problem. But, my eccentric nephew, I need one last favor from you. A performance, if you will. You're to read a letter at my funeral, one that will, shall we say, make the family gathering a touch more lively. It's hidden, and it's not in the usual places. Think outside the box, Arthur. The true treasure isn't where you expect it, just like my best jokes. While some might call this revenge, I prefer to think of it as long overdue clarity. I've left you everything. My entire estate. The dilapidated mansion, the questionable investments, the vintage record collection that's probably worth more than the house itself. Everything. But there's a catch, naturally. You must read that letter at my funeral, in front of the whole circus. No exceptions. I know it's a lot to ask, especially now. But you, Arthur, you've always had a nose for the truth, even when it stank worse than a month-old fish. It must be you. With all my affection, Silas. P.S. Don't let them play any of that sappy funeral dirge garbage. Find something with a beat. Something that swings. And for God's sake, no beige suits. Arthur slowly lifted his gaze from the letter, the scent of Silas's pipe tobacco suddenly seeming much stronger, almost suffocating. He left. Everything to me? Blackwood nodded, already opening the official-looking envelope, pulling out thick legal documents. Yes, Mr. Finch. The estate, the various ventures, and a substantial investment portfolio. Approximately $50 million in total assets. Arthur's jaw dropped. 50 million? He thought his biggest inheritance would be Silas's collection of novelty ties. But, as he stipulated, it is conditional upon you fulfilling his final request. His mind, usually a chaotic jazz solo, whirled into a frantic cacophony. 50 million. Enough to never play elevator music again. Enough to buy a decent bass guitar, maybe even a grand piano. Enough to hire a small orchestra just for the sheer joy of it. But Silas's family. His father, Robert, a man who had always viewed Silas with a mixture of disdain and envy, now came to mind. Robert, who had spent his life meticulously building his own, far less flamboyant, empire, always resented Silas's chaotic success. And his cousins, Miles and Genevieve, who had orbited Silas for years like greedy satellites, hoping to catch some residual stardust from his questionable financial exploits. They would be livid. They would be furious. Silas, the mischievous old devil, had set a trap, and Arthur was the bait, and the one who had to spring it. "When's the funeral?" Arthur asked, his voice a little hoarse. Blackwood consulted a planner. "Your uncle was quite particular. 3 days from now. St. Augustine's Chapel, followed by a reception at his estate. The entire family is expected." Arthur stood up, the letter clutched in his hand. "Right then. I suppose I have a treasure hunt to begin, and a funeral playlist to curate." "No beige," he said. "That's a start." As he reached the door, Blackwood called after him. "Mr. Finch, one more thing. Your uncle asked me to tell you. You'll know what to do with the truth." Arthur paused, a chill tracing its way down his spine. Silas's sardonic grin, captured in an old, faded photograph on Blackwood's desk, seemed to widen. "Oh, I'm sure I will," Arthur muttered, a nascent, mischievous grin mirroring his uncle's. "I'm absolutely sure." The game, it seemed, had just begun, and Arthur, for the first time in a long time, felt a strange, thrilling surge of anticipation.